Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. We're recording today on January 3rd, 2024. Welcome to the new year, bringing you all the news you can use this week. And I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group, a research and advisory firm. And joining me today for the conversation is my co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Cliff, what a year to get things started off. We're in 2024 already. How did this happen? How did the holidays already come and go at this point?
Right. I still have not yet written 2024 or 2023 incorrectly on a check yet.
Yeah.
Not that anyone writes checks
anymore. Do we write checks anymore? I was just going to say, I don't know that my kids would even know what those are anymore.
Right. That's right. But yeah,
we decided this was going to be kind of a fun week because there's not a lot of business news, but there is a lot of news still going on in the tech space. So I think the tea is going to be a lot of interesting stuff that happened last year and some new stuff this year, right?
Yeah, I thought we'd bring out some of the vintage flavors, talk about what some of our favorite cups were earlier in the year, some of the fun stories, some of the bigger stories. I found a couple that I found were pretty interesting going back to the archives, just sort of recapping what a year it's been, both for the HR tech world, but also for us. I just come off a meeting when we were talking to some of the people that handle our marketing, as you'll hear at the end, Kelly and everyone at Brand Method Media, and just the really sort of explosive growth that we've seen. And that's thanks to you, the listeners. So thank you so much for that. Over 10, 15, 20% growth in some months. We're reaching the 100 or the 10,000 download mark.
I like the 100,000 where you're heading, but I'll take 10,000 right now.
Yeah. Challenge to everyone out there.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, one of the big challenges that we had for the HR community, really for the last few years, even before I joined, this has been my first year, so that was pretty amazing. A great year to be in, was this whole idea of the 55 by 25 and seeing that larger percentage of HR groups at their organizations that are being seen as strategic partners. And we finally saw huge growth that this year, reaching that 50% mark, going up 4% from a previous high. So just amazing, all of you out there, both supporting us and just doing what you do. I think that was kind of my biggest exciting moment of the year. I mean, obviously we have our big paper and lots of stuff to go through, but that was one that stood out to me for sure.
Yeah, 2023 was really quite amazing when you think about it. Not only is just the podcast has been fun, right? This is our fourth year, your first full year, right? So we've really been, I think, on this journey of understanding what's happening in the HR tech space, but also kind of understanding who Sapient Insights is, right? We started off in 2020 during the pandemic, both with our organization and as doing our podcast and sort of trying to sort of understand how we were taking the research paper that had been done for so long under a lot of other brands and building it into the organization with my partners, Terry Zipper and Susan Richards. And it's been exciting to sort of travel this path of developing sort of an approach to how we want to gather data and share it and support the HR technology community and support the HR community as a whole. I think that's been the exciting thing is we've broadened the scope of what we're talking a lot about. And when you joined last year, really this was almost like your first week last year, because I think you joined like the week or 2 weeks before Christmas last year, didn't you?
That's exactly right. In fact, I was looking and my first podcast would have been this one, because although I had joined, there was a lot of just ramping up, doing this sort of HR stuff, right? Getting the paperwork in order, learning the culture. And so, I was thinking of those sort of Spotify wrapped sort of things that everyone gets and thinking about our podcast with that. And I was looking, and these are sort of rough estimates, but we talked about over 125 stories last year.
Oh, wow.
Give or take. Yeah, because we cover about 5 to 10 per, right? We do about 2 per month. But there's somewhere, if there's a really big story, we'll talk about just that for a while. And of course, there's kind of slower times like now, but still going through all that, which means we're mentioning just about the same number of companies. Sometimes there's multiple companies in one, and sometimes we're talking about the same company over time, but over 100 different companies, talked about over 35 to 50 people that we sort of linked to on LinkedIn or on Twitter or now X. That was something that happened this year. Almost forgot about that one.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even tell you how many topics, although certainly AI was a big one. That was one of the stories I was mentioning that we'll talk about a little bit, is that at the start of the year, it's like, oh, here's a little interesting story about AI. Think about regulating it back in February. And by December, we had full executive orders coming from the White House and full EU regulations.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because in February of every year is when we actually really sit down to redesign any questions that are going on for the research, right? And the big annual survey. And I can remember last year in February, it was just an inkling. I mean, ChatGPT was out there, but it still wasn't like mainstream news yet. It was this thing that you were hearing kind of on the edges. And I remember us sitting down going, we need to add some questions about artificial intelligence this year.
Yes.
We've always had questions about adoption and a couple of things, but we needed to add some questions about ethics and how people were managing it and what they were using with it. And then by the time the survey was out in May of that year, it was a full blown on sort of the market was shifting as we were talking about it, basically, right? Every week you would come out and there'd be something new to talk about in the AI space. So yeah, as much as I think that I hate to sort of label what one whole year was about, I would say that 2023 was the year that AI changed its trajectory, right? It was no longer just a future vision, a conversation about what we could or might be doing. I think, yes, last year it really came into something where it was something we could see in our day-to-day lives. And that was unique. And I think it's gonna be a year that we'll look back on and say, boy, this is really when things shifted, right?
Yeah. When I think back as we're talking about this, it really does show some good prescience on your part, well, on our part as well. When we were sitting there in that February meeting, talking about the questions we need to ask, because as you and I were going out there after we'd gathered this data, we were able to talk about things like, what is your organization's code of ethics around AI, as opposed to what I saw, and no offense to anyone else, but just it was very surface level, a lot of the data I was seeing around AI, because they hadn't really anticipated how much it would grow. So a lot of, are you using AI in your organization? That's interesting, of course, but I'm also thinking about, we were able to gather data of, what is your plan? What is your strategic plan for AI? What sort of rules and regulations are you following? How are you using it? What specific applications, rather than just, do you have it? And you have to take chances. There's plenty of questions in that survey. Yeah. It's certainly not short, and some things come to life. But I was really glad we were able to capture that, because it allowed us to have more in-depth conversations with all of you when we were doing these live events and doing these webinars. So that's really just amazing to think back on as we're starting 2024. What's it going to be this time?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, right? And February is just around the corner, and we'll be looking at the question. So what is the topics that we're going to need to be focused on next year? Got some inkling about it. We'll probably be talking a little bit about it. We're getting ready to do a webinar on January 24th with our good friends over at IMA, who were distributors of the survey, had hit enough numbers in their distribution process to get a webinar through the process. And so we decided to do a joint effort with them called HR Tech State of the Union. That's, I think, going to be January 24th that week. It's at 1 p.m. Eastern. And I think we're going to be talking a little bit about what we saw in the data and what we're planning on sort of looking at this year. So just if anybody's kind of looking at where they can get some insight into maybe looking forward, I would recommend attending that webinar, because I think you and I both are going to be brainstorming what are the topics we're going to be talking about in the survey this year, right?
Yeah. And of course, we'd love to hear from you, anyone listening to this. If you've got some ideas of things you would like to know, things you are curious about, or things you think you will want to know about in terms of data that we gather, come to the webinar, ask us live, or just you can email us here. We always have all of our socials and all of our email, which is easy enough, right? It's just either of our names, Cliff or Stacey at Sapient Insights Group. We'd like to hear what you think will be big in 2024.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was definitely the AI. Another thing that it wasn't as big, but there was a lot of deals going on. And we talked a lot about it in sort of bits and pieces. So much so, I think, Stacey, we were laughing in the green room beforehand that we'd almost forgotten about some of these deals, even though they were just absolutely massive.
Yeah.
Probably, I think the biggest one, and this is, again, my memory can be a little hazy going all the way back, trying to go through all the notes, but Silver Lake Capital acquiring Qualtrics for 12.5 billion USD, I believe is the biggest one in the HR tech space. There were a few others, 1 billion for Reward Gateway being bought by Edenred. When Zoom bought WorkVivo, I remember us talking about that for a while. Bequam buying Paynalytics, HireVue, acquiring Modern Hire, which certainly didn't lead to any confusion.
Yeah.
I remember being at HR Tech. That was pretty amazing this year. We'll jump to that topic in a second, but just being like, okay, who bought whom? Because so many companies either have the word pay in them or hire in their name, right?
Yeah.
If they're in the
if we can ask one thing of all the vendors out there,
yes.
Be a little more innovative in your naming conventions.
That's your New Year's resolution we're giving to you.
Yeah.
We know you do pay. You don't have to put it in the name.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting you talk about the investments and the acquisitions and everything. Anita Lunkin, who is a good friend of ours, she writes The Future of Work and has a new book on payroll and a new book on pay equity. And she does sort of an analysis every year on basically how much spending has been taking place on investments in the HR tech space. And she found that 2023 was 45% less than 2022. We knew 2021 and 2022 were just big years for new HR tech investment. We came out of COVID. I think the whole world was sort of, we're going to invest a lot. And I wasn't surprised by that. I told her, I said, what I saw from investors, and I think this is something to be aware of, is that people got into HR technology because they saw the problems and they said, oh, we can fix that. And then almost all the investors generally we would find them afterwards coming to sort of talk to us, hit that wall of, oh, HR is more complex than I realized.
Yeah.
It's not just a sales tool or a marketing tool. Yeah, there's different regional issues, different country issues, different state issues. Like you just start to see quickly then sort of now, I think what we're hearing more of is that, yes, the market's softening a little bit, but not that much. It really is that I think the investors are becoming more savvy, or at least they're asking better questions, and those companies who are doing better, or those who come with, are basically people who have some experience in the HR space, so they understand what they're getting into. So that Silver Lake acquisition is a really good example of that. I mean, that's a huge investment they made in Qualtrics. They purchased the last remaining shares that SAP owned after they had sort of sold off part of theirs. But it's important to note that Silver Lake is not, they actually also have some other big names in their portfolio, including Achievers, one of the largest rewards and recognition tools in the market, as well as Cegid. I'm never sure if I say Cegid's right correctly.
Sorry, any French listeners.
Yeah, but they're sort of a combined payroll talent suite. They have a bunch of brands under them. Talent software was purchased by them. Again, lots of industry-specific softwares in the HR space. So they already had some experience when it came to the HR space. They had a couple of other solutions that they also had offloaded recently, I think, for Silver Lake. And so it's interesting, I think, to see how this space is changing a little bit, that having experience in HR helps a lot, right?
Yeah. I was thinking about this. I don't mean to spring this on you because I know this wasn't in when we talked before, but I was just thinking about the stat you were talking about in terms of investment. I remember, I had left for vacation, listeners. So that's what I'm saying. Before I left, that's what I'm referring to. But you had been doing some analysis on organizational spending. And I remember we were kind of racking our brains trying to wrap our heads around organizational spending in 2023 and sort of predictions for 2024, a little different than sort of institutional financial firms buying HR tech. But do you remember what the sort of outcome of that was? What were we looking at, an increase in spending in HR tech overall at the organizational level?
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting sort of dynamic, because if you looked at our data, it felt a little bit, and we definitely saw this, that there was, like I said, pulling back, right? But not a huge pulling back, and not in all categories, right? So we'll have some, we're actually getting ready to put a small paper out, a little bit of an announcement about some of that data. So watch for a press release on this, because it's really, I think, the thing about data and understanding any kind of data that you get in the market is understanding how to read it and in what context to read it in. And so in this particular case, us being able to slice and dice by companies of every size made a big difference. What we really found is that large companies actually will actually be spending a little bit more next year. They're still on this increased planning spend space, right? And mid-market organizations as well are either staying the same or sort of increasing slightly in a lot of areas of their HR technology spending. SMBs are definitely holding and dropped their investments quite a bit in the previous years. And SMBs for us is under 500 employees. And we even went down to 200 employees and it didn't change much. It wasn't until you got to under 100 employees that we saw that there was a real dramatic change in some of that spending plans. So I think when you look at it, people kind of like, yeah, the market's tough, things are, but it's interesting. It's the same kind of language I hear being used about the economics right now, right? That with the interest rates kind of where they're at and where the market's at, even in other countries versus the US, it's not just us, is that the economy is having a soft landing is the term I hear a lot. I don't know if that's where, but I feel that that's kind of what we're seeing in the HR tech space. Look, you probably aren't going to be seeing this rapid growth that we saw coming out of COVID in some cases, right? You're definitely not probably going to see like double-digit growth in any area unless you're in a green space market or like Asia Pacific market where you're primarily going to see sort of doubling of what is smaller investments originally. But you are going to, I think, continue to see investments this year, at least, especially in the large and mid-market spaces on the HR tech investment. And I think that's important for buyers to realize, because I think there's oftentimes this headlines drive decisions. Perception oftentimes outranks what is really happening behind the scenes. And I think it's important for the HR buyers to be able to explain to their executive leaders that even though you hear the HR companies are downsizing, HR tech is, or not, but technology companies are downsizing and technology companies are having a rough time right now, the market as a whole isn't. And we're definitely seeing that people are still investing heavily in the HR space, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it goes along with that whole idea of becoming more strategic too.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of something that I was thinking about when thinking over the year was I remember being somewhat surprised that the ability for HR Tech, the event, right, the HR Technology Expo, to have really rebounded in the last few years. I mean, obviously, like all live events, hurt very badly by the pandemic years, but was quite pleased to see the activity, the sort of energy on the floor. And we had some great video of kind of everyone coming in at once from when we were on the floor, but also seeing all the startup pavilion. And it'll be interesting to see that momentum and what that sort of looks like for next year. Or for this year, I should say. Look, I've already made the first mistake. 2024, this year.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think live events are definitely back based off of what we saw last year. Every conference we went to was pretty well booked up, right? I don't think I went to an event where I heard, we just didn't get as many people as expected. In vendor events or the industry events, the HR technology conference, or some of the smaller SHRM events, those kind of things, right?
Yeah.
But
there were some global political problems that were causing events overseas to not see the attendance being as high, but there's no way to predict that. So
yeah, it was good to see, I think, people back in person. It's one of the reasons that we made the decision to, and next year, again, same thing we did this year, to take what was a short sort of virtual workshop that we'd been doing for quite some time and turn it into sort of a 6-month cohort workshop on building an adaptable HR system strategy, because we had been getting a lot of requests for people who wanted to participate in something where they can connect with people and have more interaction, right?
Yeah. And also that was something directly, as we always ask you as listeners to give us feedback. That's some of the feedback we got from live events. Like we want more. We want more chances to interact. We want this to be longer and have more opportunity to adjust it to our particular organization. So that's part of why we created this new event.
The workshop. Yeah. We're excited about it. If anybody's interested in it, let us know, drop us a DM or send us an email and we'll send you the details on it. But it's also in our newsletter this year. So Cliff, we've talked a little bit about the hot topics. We've talked a little bit about the biggest deals. We've talked a little bit about spending and what we saw with both the survey and events. But I think also you had pulled a list of just the quirkiest things that we talked about last year, right?
Yeah,
and I say that with the truth. Hopefully it isn't dating me, but I think quirky is a word, right? Like that maybe it doesn't ever use, but that's exactly, I think, the term when we started looking at stuff. Like there was some unique stuff last year, right?
Yeah, we did. As I mentioned, a couple of the stories that stood out to me only because of how funny it was to look back. not that the stories themselves are funny, that on as early as March 7th, I think it was the first time we started mentioning AI, at least in 2023. Of course, we brought it up before, just saying EOC is going to draft some guidelines of saying, hey, if you're using AI for hiring, there should be some regulations around it. You should have some transparency. And by the end of October, the story was Biden signs AI executive order, most expansive regulatory attempt yet. So that's how quickly things move. Yeah. We make a lot of jokes about government moving slowly, but it just shows how big AI had become, that it went from the EOC, sort of one of the more minor departments, to the president is getting involved here. So there was that. But along with the AI, some fun ones that I was looking for and that I pulled up was Artifact, the news app. They had some AI text-to-speech stuff where you can have the news read to you by Snoop Dogg or Gwyneth Paltrow. I think I made the joke at the time that these are things you just don't expect to hear on an HR tech podcast. McDonald's also using AI, using Google's Bard and their cloud for their AI assistant, created an AI chatbot named Ask Pickles, which I don't think I'd mentioned at the time, but since then they've created a YouTube video that you can click on, and it's just as off-putting. See, McDonald's, we love you.
All right. Okay. That's a challenge, everybody. Go out and look at the Ask Pickles YouTube show, because now I want to see everybody's reaction to that, and send us the pictures.
And then at the time, this was probably my favorite phrase that I ever got to say during the year. This is my own fun on the podcast. We were talking about the layoffs at Epic Games. They make Fortnite, so they're probably the biggest. And as you mentioned earlier, Stacey, each industry is sort of beholden to its own rhythms, right? And gaming industry was destroyed by layoffs last year. That was definitely the biggest story. Anything in gaming, which right now is the biggest entertainment sector, was just wiped out. And during that whole thing about Epic Games writing these layoff letters, and it just didn't really jive, and people were really happy. At the same time, a maker of a game called Hatoful Boyfriend, which is a pigeon dating sim, said she had not been receiving her royalties. Now, since December 12th of this year, she has received her royalties. So thank goodness that the people making the pigeon dating sims are getting paid, and that I can keep saying pigeon dating sim.
Next year, we definitely got to do this. Updates on the stories that we talked about. What really happened afterwards, right?
Right.
Now I'm feeling better that the pigeon dating sim lady got her royalties that she deserved, right?
Yeah, there you go. Everyone was probably worried. Hatomoa, that's the name of the woman that made it. She has received her royalty payments that she's owed for the last 2 years. I can only assume that they heard our podcast, got nervous, and immediately paid everyone. Were there any? I know that you and I had talked about some that sort of we remembered through the times, just any of the big stories or anything, any just memories that you have. I know I remember going with you and I seeing Chin Blossoms live in Home Desert. That was pretty fun.
That was really awesome. I will say that. So we had a lot of good events last year, most of them towards the fall, I will say. Yeah. We did. So I think probably we did a great dinner in New York City, which was fabulous, where we had an opportunity to meet with quite a few organizations. That was a cornerstone event where they asked us to come and just talk a little bit about what's going on with skills management and learning. And that was a great, I think, first of all, it was a good venue that we got to go to with some really amazing drinks. But more importantly, the conversation got really deep and really interesting, I think, about sort of how learning organizations were sort of handling this shift to online learning was still sort of a thing that organizations had been sort of trying to work towards, but hadn't quite gotten there. And then overnight with COVID, they went from face-to-face to online learning almost immediately. And so we were having some real interesting conversations about how that was now sort of coming back to sort of different layers of learning models. So that was really fun. And then, yes, we did I think HR Tech Conference was a blast this year. For me, not only was it amazing to get a chance to see everyone and to have the event be such a big conversation point, but I think our team was there in full force with our pink and our logos, and everywhere we went, we got compliments on the pink bags and the pink pocket thing, and then
Yep.
so I think this year we might show up with some shoes with pink on them this year is the goal.
I've already bought mine.
Yeah. So that was fun just because as a team, we got a chance to do our first sort of client and customer dinner event at the really good sushi place in the Mandalay Bay event there. And that was nice because we generally have talked to a lot to our clients around the years, but we don't always get a chance to sort of host them all together and give them a chance to talk to each other. And that was really cool. We had a couple of clients from Canada and a couple of people from Ohio and a couple of people from Florida and Atlanta, and they were all talking about the different regional differences they were seeing on the food and stuff. And that was a cool event. But I think, I will have to say that the keynote we did in Desert Springs, right? That's where we were at. By far the Jim Blossom concert, just because I felt like I was a teenager again. And I can remember it was really cute because there was someone who kind of came up afterwards and said, someone told us they were surprised you were out there dancing. And I'm like, I do enjoy having fun too. So
yeah. I went to an event in Denver. I was 15.5.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. And they had a llama, take photos with the llama. And it's these moments when you're like, you look back over the year and you're like, I've got a really great job.
Yeah.
Like this is really nice. And
yeah.
And
we
really,
love to get to do it with people who are like all the HR practitioners who are out there, right? That's the thing is that you get into these rooms, and I know sometimes, your whole job is just traveling, and there is a lot of travel, and there is a lot of hard work in preparing for these events and making sure we have the right content, making sure that we have a message that's of value to everybody who's in the room. But sometimes it's just so much fun just to sit down and have a conversation we had a great conversation with the head of HR and payroll for Mary Bedeau, right? Who the skincare product company. And that was just when you get a chance to talk to him about the real life issues like compensation challenges and challenges with onboarding. And that's the stuff that really, I think, makes all the hard work that we put in worth it, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I got the chance to be on a sort of live podcast panel, and Jamie, I'm forgetting your last name. I might have even got your first name, but from Trust Radius, and as head of HR there, and just hearing sort of when we talk about it as data, right, as numbers, and then hearing about these sort of things being implemented, and how you work with people and partnerships that you have through the organization, and you talk about it all the time, Stacey, is that one of the things we can, till we're blue in the face, say 80% of organizations to do this, but it won't work unless you create relationships with the people in your organization, right? And make sure that you understand, just as we do, what's most important to them and what are they going to achieve? What are they trying to do? And then together you can really achieve something great for your entire organization. And I thought 2023 really showed that. And we saw it. We did see the data from all those little individual qualitative anecdotal moments. We saw this big swell of all of a sudden, there's a lot more strategic viewpoints. There's a lot more of just a overview of doing what's best for the organization and what's also just best for everyone. And without those two things being opposed, it was a really great year, I thought. Obvious, as I said, there are certain industries that were hit hard by layoffs, and my heart goes out to you. But I think overall, we're poised really well for a great 2024 as a whole. I mean, as an HR tech industry, but of course, we here at Sapient Insights, certainly.
Yeah, definitely. We're excited about where things are headed. And maybe just to kind of wrap things up, I know we want to talk a little bit about the stuff that we had sort of seen last year, what was growing and not. I do, like you said, the tech industry, the industry overall that had the hardest time was the technology industry last year, right? They definitely saw downsizing. We definitely saw layoffs. At the end of last year, we saw companies like Deloitte and Accenture do quite a bit of layoffs. Accenture in particular laid off about 18,000 people. That's a real thing that people are dealing with and dealt with over the holidays. But I also think there's a lot of positives, like you mentioned, that came out of the work that we all put into surviving COVID, and more importantly, making sure we did it in a human way. And my hope is that the AI conversation doesn't change how we think about our roles in HR. I think the next couple of years are going to be hard. AI is going to make our jobs harder because there's going to be a lot more risk. There's going to be a lot more people pushing the envelope, a lot more of our executives asking us to do things that are really changing how we think about our interactions with our employees, our candidates, and our customers. And I think HR is going to have to sometimes stand the line of what's the difference between being innovative versus being ethical versus being sort of just in regulation. And that's a tough place to be for anybody, but particularly for someone who's already got a lot of regulations built into our jobs, right? So I do think that it's important for us to acknowledge that and what we're looking forward to in 2024. But I also think in if we get past these couple of years, they're going to be a little bit tough. I think that the AI explosion is really going to allow us to, if we do it right, if we hold the line of ethics and data integrity and those kind of things, and understanding the biases and understanding the limitations of AI, it can truly free us up to do the things that are most important, which is being humans with other human beings, spending the time when someone's lost someone to have the conversation while the AI is taking care of all the paperwork in the background, spending the time with a new mother or with a new father or with a new family who's adopted a child to understand how their needs are changing while maybe AI is handling all of the processes to get things invested in their next steps that they need to take as a family. Just spending the time talking to someone about where they want to be in their career while AI is giving options in the background. I think those are all things that are really opportunities in our world, but we are going to have to be diligent over the next couple of years to make sure it turns into that kind of a powerful change, right?
Very well said. Good message to start the year.
We had a couple of news stories, Cliff, though, that we did want to touch on. Did you want to touch those, or do we want to hold those over till next week or the next time?
Let's hold those over. There was really, I don't believe, unless you've got something specific, I think nothing too crazy, right?
Yeah, nothing on the HR side. I think it is probably worth noting, if you haven't been watching what's going on with the Chat GPT, there is a lawsuit that just got put out by New York Times, I believe it is.
Yeah.
And it's worth watching how that goes, because it is about content and content ownership. And I think we'll talk a lot about that when we get together in the next 2 weeks and our next podcast. I think there's also some updates in Epic Games, that exact conversation we just had, where they've actually won their lawsuit against Google. And what does that mean for a company like Epic, and how that and for sort of the ability to use it's payments inside of these sort of free technologies that are accessible through adoptions and download tools, and what are some of those risks. And those are actually all things that are going to have an impact on the HR technology space. I think the most important thing for all of us in HR to be who are on the development, design, the sort of support side, is to realize that the most interesting innovations are probably happening in other areas, because that's going to have the big impacts on us. And we need to be keeping an eye out what's going on beyond just HR. So maybe we'll have that as our podcast in 2 weeks, Cliff.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Get back into the swing of things, but I thought it would be nice, and as we did, kind of talk about 2023 and what people can expect in 2024. And it's really looking forward to it.
Okay, so just as we're wrapping up, do you have 2 things you think everyone should keep an eye on for next year then? Or for this year now, let's say.
Yeah. Well, one thing, and you mentioned it, last year, before the AI sort of blew up, we were talking about what we thought was going to be one of the big stories. And we both agreed that the idea of skills, just sort of skills management, coming to the forefront rather than sort of being a side thing, but really getting involved in all aspects of HR. And that did happen. It was just getting overshadowed by so much that was happening with the AI story. But I do think that the concept of skills and being able to inventory them and being able to plan strategically with skills is still an ongoing conversation. I think it'll rise back up sort of to the front of mind as we go through this. And of course, there's going to be some overlap, right? There's going to be some AI usage of taxonomies of skills and that sort of thing. Another thing that we talked a little bit about post-HR tech, and I still see, is this idea of the marriage of sort of the functional day-to-day aspects of work, your transactional work, and how that is being blended into HR. We talked a little bit about how tactical everyday things like payroll and time management can actually lead to broader strategic movements within HR, but we're seeing like productivity apps and new software come out a lot. That was a lot of that startup we saw at the HR Tech Expo, where they're marrying these ideas of how do you get HR to the people doing their jobs at the moment, whether that be training, whether that be the documentation they need, compliance, just as you said, being able to look up something for their family. What are my benefits? I need this now with the item that I'm using for safety regulations or for looking up inventory. So I think those two things will they were already existing stories, but I think they're going to be something we're going to see more and more of because we're already seeing investments being made in those areas.
Yeah, and I agree with both those. I think those are both big areas of conversation. I would add my top two topics that for next year that are going to be, I think, everyone should be paying attention to and everyone should maybe be thinking a little bit differently about is one is compensation. I think we're going to see a real shift in compensation management and the approach both the systems and businesses are taking to compensation because of not just the pay equity conversation and the pay transparency conversation, which is sort of bubbling up because of all of the regulations and requirements around that are coming to fruition, but also because I think people are probably underestimating how much data we have in the compensation space around our sort of comp benchmarking and tool sets that is probably going to roll into this skills management conversation. I think people who are in the comp space know and understand that this is a real big opportunity. And I think we're going to see some changes there. And I think it's going to open the eyes of a lot of people onto that compensation data might be this next space that really takes off and changes this year. The other one probably that I would say is not being talked about right now, but I think based off of what we're seeing in the data and where we think most of the conversations are going to go is we know payroll was a big topic now and global payroll. We're going to see probably more investments in that. But I do think that the latter part of this year, we're going to start to see some changes in the time and attendance and absence and leave spaces, because those are areas that have not changed dramatically. There are a lot of new players in this space. We're seeing some real interesting innovations come out in this space. And as we become a global market, more and more organizations are requiring, I think, more wider capabilities, not just industry capabilities here. And so I think that's a latter part of probably this year and early into next year. But those are the two areas I would say that we're not talking about, but we probably should be. So cool stuff as we're getting into the next year, Cliff.
Absolutely. I could not be more excited.
Well, I know we're getting to the end of our time, so I just wanted to, as we're wrapping up today, a couple of big announcements, pushes. For those of you who follow us on a regular basis, you know that the big annual HR System Survey white paper has been out since October. It is available in the research marketplace. It's a great gift for anyone looking to assess or purchase new HR technology, building an HR system strategy, or looking to understand the competitive HR technology landscape. We covered over 200 HR vendors in this year's report and had input from over 5,000 HR technology and HR practitioners, largest we've ever had at this point. And so we're really proud of it and excited about it. So if you're still in the business of looking at that kind of data, you can download it off our marketplace. Also, as I noted, we'll be doing this Building an Adaptable HR System Strategy, What Works workshop. It's a 6-month program, shelf to C-suite. Please drop us a line if you're interested in participating. We're going to do a beta course on that starting probably in the next few months. And so this is a really good opportunity to get in on the first cohort. As I noted, we have January 24th, the HR Tech State of the Union webinar. If you want to sign up for that, go to the IMA website. It's going to be at 1 p.m. Eastern on that day. Both Cliff and I are going to be delivering that, and you don't want to miss it. And then also go to our website, sign up for our newsletter to get ongoing updates on research launches where we'll be speaking or visiting, and when you can participate in the annual survey, which is opening May 1st to the public. And be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle podcast, HR We Have a Problem, hosted by our CEO, Terry Zipper. These HR Huddle episodes are important, and if you like them and want to support them, please be sure to subscribe and leave a ratings and review where you grab your podcast. To stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and get all the behind the scenes content, you can follow us at Sapient Insights on LinkedIn. X now, not Twitter, and Instagram. And thanks, Cliff. Thank you for all the work that you do and pulling all the work together around this. Thanks to our production team, including Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast run by their amazing founder, Kelly. Our marketing team, Lisa Renko and Summer Orlano, who make sure all of this gets put together, packaged, and distributed so you can access it every week. And then thanks to our listeners and the community. We couldn't do this without you. You are what make this a joy to participate in and deliver each week. And finally, that's it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you needed to start the engines running this week. We'll be back in just 2 weeks with another pot of boiling hot HR Tech updates and insights.